We're on.
Well, welcome again, everybody. I'm Sarah Schmidt, one of the people that serves on the program committee that finds people to get these wonderful programs. And I'm delighted to introduce David Joffers, who I actually don't know very much about, so I'm hoping, I realize as I've got up to do this, that there's not much information left. So I hope you give us a little bit more extra how you got into this, or whatever you would like us to know. But David has been teaching on topics from birds to butterflies to trees to microorganisms for many groups, including college biology courses, nonprofit environmental groups. And he's worked for the National Park Service, U.S. Forest Service, University of Washington, and Woodland Park Zoo. So I'm really delighted to have you.
You could have just raised your expectations to unrealistic levels. You might be disappointed after this.
Make sure that that's working.
Test. All right, we'll test this. What's your favorite bird? I'm getting no answers. This clearly isn't working. All right, but everyone can hear me? Everyone can hear me? Okay. I'll be as silent as a butterfly on this thing. Let's see here. Get rid of all this. Can we do one check with the Zoom crowd just to make sure they can see everything works fine? They can hear me fine. Someone's nodding. Perfect. Okay. If not, stop me. We'll fix that. Okay. So thank you all for coming tonight. Mothing season is upon us. This weekend is going to bring out a number of species, but they need the sun. Unlike your birds, which are warm-blooded, they need to constantly try to find food. Moths, being cold-blooded, if it's cold, they don't do anything. So I really love the weekend that's coming up because we're going to get a whole bunch of insect activity, and trust me, the birds are also excited about that too, because that is food. You might want to.
I'm just trying to make sure that.
Okay, that one screen will be fine. So we're largely looking at moths in relation to birds. Namely, I call this presentation landscaping for bird food. So people will garden for birds, people will garden for butterflies for their own sake. So why would I garden for moths? Well, for your birds. We'll get more into that. But how many people have heard, especially more recently, like I never see butterflies or bees in my yard, or any insect for that matter. And then you look at their yard, and their yard looks something like this. I might expect to see robins pulling up earthworms, and that's about it. They're surprised when I tell them day 53 of just letting leaves sit in my yard. So far, nothing bad has happened. So once again, I give a lot of presentations, a lot of classes on butterflies versus moths. And you can kind of see why. I mean, this is your typical butterfly, kind of pretty, large, during sunny weather. And then that's kind of your typical moth. It's drab, it's gray, it's unattractive. Don't they all eat your clothes? All that kind of stuff. They always fly in my hair, which is stop standing by lights. First of all. So we'll be talking about the moths. But back to this is the bird class, or this is the bird group, excuse me. Anything I can help you with?
I just want to make sure this is on.
Okay, so once again, why care about moths when this is a bird group? Well, because you've heard of the Cornell studies as far as the bird declines, right? This ain't random. So just a few of the shocking stats there: 1 in 4, 30%, however you want to interpret that. It's not evenly distributed across habitats. Grasslands have lost the most. You can imagine farming. We need food too, but could we do a little bit better? Wetlands have seen an increase. Hooray! because of all the wetland restoration and protection that have gone on. What are we? We're western forests. We've seen a decline as well, about your average 30%. But the change among species has been particularly dramatic for species in which insects are essential to raising young. They have seen the biggest drop. Insects not essential, more of like your seed eaters and things like that, they've been doing fine. So it's not just for adults, remember. By the way, we'll be going back to Douglas Tallamy. He's up in the upper right-hand corner. We'll talk about that presentation if you haven't seen it. We'll get to his keystone plants, and you should just go watch his presentation. I'll link it. I'll mention it later. So, anyone have an idea in the audience? How many caterpillars have you heard that a chickadee nest needs to raise a brood of fledglings? Does anyone remember? This is my first in-class Zoom meeting. What's that? Well, if you know it, then shout it out. I say, this is my first in-class presentation for a long time. I can actually interact with you guys now. What, closer? About 9,000 just to get them to fledge. And remember, like, the fledglings then depend on them further from there on out. So you're talking upwards of 10,000 caterpillars for one batch of chickadees. So why are the birds that depend on these insects declining? Well, Tallamy's group's been working on this. He's researched a native hedgerow dominated by native trees versus an invaded hedgerow. He's largely on the East Coast, but we see many of the same effects here. He sees that the number of species, upper left there, far more species are present. These are insect species, not bird species, by the way. Far more insect species are present in the native hedgerow versus the invaded. So about a 68% reduction in species richness. Just plain abundance, middle graph there, just plain abundance of insects drops 91% in a hedgerow that is largely dominated by invasive species. Biomass further, biomass drops 96% in a hedgerow largely dominated by non-native species. So if you're a bird living in these invaded hedgerows, pickings are slim. So once again, we come back to why be curious then about moths. So we'll go back to birds in a bit. So one, look at those things. And this isn't a selection of tropical moths. These are all Washington moths. One technically is a British moth, but now it's here, so it's ours now. Gorgeous, right? Give butterflies a run for their money. Is that the cinnabar? Yes, it's the cinnabar. The one in the lower left there, that's from Europe. It was intentionally introduced here to try to combat tansy ragwort, which basically gives cows, kidney failure? And kills them. So this moth can eat that plant just fine and incorporate those toxins into its own body, and what it is telling the birds with those colors is, don't mess with me. We get some, but then we get the monster ones too. It's not just the colors, right? Some of them are just impressive. For those who have seen my specimens up here, they get big. How many of you have seen these two moths on Whidbey Island? They're here. They are native. Those are our two. Jay's raising his hand. But they also get tiny. So we have this very unuseful term called the micro moths, because some micro moths are actually pretty big. It's not really a good taxonomic name for it, but it's stuck. But some of them are clearly micro. How small that thing is. One of my favorite micro moths are called fairy moths. They have these super long antennae. The males do 3 times their wing length. And they dance in leks, where the males all get together and they go up and down and up and down, and the females fly through, and the males have these big bulging eyes to find the females. The females have much smaller eyes. Females have long antennae, but only 1.5 times their body length. Only 1.5. So fairies do exist, and they are moths. It's not just size and color. Moths have a dizzying array of lifestyles. So the common ancestor, so the closest insect relative to butterflies and moths are the Trichoptera. Anyone know caddisflies? So aquatic insects. So butterflies and moths arose from aquatic insects, or I guess it'd be more accurate to say they share a common ancestor. We have a group that's gone back to the water. So this genus is called let's see, my cursor working? It is. This genus is called Petrophila, the water lovers. And she actually takes a bubble of air with her as she dives underwater. So she's a scuba diver. And she lays her eggs underwater, and the larvae with gills eat algae, underwater algae. That's a moth going back to the water. The other one down here, the sooty-winged jay, please correct me if I'm getting this wrong. The sooty-wing Ichthytalis? There's a lot of Latin when you learn moths, not as many common names as with your birds. This one should be a friend. Its larvae eat wasps. So the female flies onto this nest at night, lays eggs. There might be 3 larvae per brood cell eating that larva wasp. We think there's got to be some chemical mimicry involved, otherwise the wasp should be defending it. So does she smell like a wasp, but she comes in and lays eggs? All kinds of fascinating things. So we have cannibals, we have algae eaters in water, but most of them are plant eaters just like our butterflies. We're talking in the larval stage. But just to give you an idea of just the dizzying diversity of moths compared to butterflies, we're going to ask the peanut gallery here, I can finally interact with an audience. Anyone want to hazard a guess as to the number of species of butterflies worldwide? Throw out a guess. I refuse to accept shrugs. I'm hearing 3,000. I'm hearing 10,000. Do I got more than 10,000? Okay, now throw out some guesses for number of moths. 100,000. Ooh, 100,000. Does anyone question 100,000 going, no way? Anyone questioning that? About 20,000 species of butterflies, depending on who you ask. Oh, you want to see the worst fights? Talk to a taxonomist in the Lepidoptera world. Worldwide for moths, about 160,000, and you know we haven't found them all. If you want to find a new species, study micromoths. There are new species right outside, right now. Wait, maybe not right now, but when the season comes in. For North America, hazard a guess. Butterflies, number of species. 5,000? Ooh, I'd love to live there. Okay, so I'm still hearing in the thousands. Anyone hazard a guess for moths in North America? That's a good guess. About 750 butterflies in North America, north of Mexico, compared to about 11,000 species of moths. Cool, let's go Washington. Number of butterflies? 50. Oh, you do live in Western Washington. To be fair, Western Washington is probably the worst habitat on the planet for butterflies. We are too cold and wet, and Whidbey's actually all right. Whidbey lives in the rain shadow, gets a bit of sun. Snohomish County, where I live, is the worst. Anyone want to hazard a guess on moths in Washington? He's thinking. Don't rush the man. We have about 160 in our state, but about 3,000 species of moths. You can see why we don't have field guides for moths. It'd be textbook thick. Okay, then why didn't you yell it out? Don't be shy, we're all friends here. So approximately 160,000 species of moths worldwide, 11,000 North America, 3,000 in Washington state alone. Why are these things not more popular? Part of it is because when people complain about moths being, they're all brown, and they're not entirely wrong. A lot of them are browns and grays, and they're kind of difficult to identify. They don't have most of them don't have the flashes of color like that sample I showed you at the front. And a majority of them fly at night. This show happens beyond our observation, our knowledge. We go to sleep, and that's when the show is going on. I say majority. There are some that fly during the day. There are some that only fly during the day, just to confuse all the butterfly folks out there. And the resources are few, but they are increasing. One thing I've noticed, and Jay can share my angst, what's my pity, my remorse, whatever word you want to use there. A lot of the resources are very dense. A lot of them are very technical. They're this thick. They ain't field guides. One of my favorites is by Dr. Paul Oppler. He and Jerry Powell treats 2,500 species in Western North America. Remember, there's 11,000 in all of North America, but 2,500 species? That's ridiculous. Where's the beginner's guide? So that's something I'm working on. So I call it, I'm working on the guide. The transcript's almost done. I'm looking for a publisher. But it's going to be called Moths of North America, a guide to the common, widespread, and distinctive species. So I went through our list of 3,000 species and came up with a list of about 350 that are common, widespread, and distinctive. Consider it the shallow end of the deep, deep moth pool. So you pick up this book. I don't have a publishing date yet, just have some patience. So the idea is you pick up this book, you learn your beginner moths. If you get interested in it, dive into the internet sources, dive into Powell's book and learn more. If you say, moths aren't for me, well, cool, you have a beginner's knowledge to moths. And that way, when the herald shows up after overwintering, you'll know, hey, I know that one. You at least know 350 of them. So back to birds. Once again, why be curious about moths? Well, moths are worth curiosity in their own sake, but let's relate this back to birds because then the story gets so much richer. It's not just the larvae that the adults are feeding to the kids. It's the adults that the adults are just plain eating. I mean, we've seen Western kingbirds do their thing, right? They can take out sphinx moths. Kingbirds are good at what they do. And so now it starts to make sense why all these moths are so boring and brown. It's camouflage. They've mastered it. This stands out to us, but that, everyone sees both of them, right? There's two there. It's two different photos, but yeah, so if you are tasty, better not to be seen. It's not just the adults. Look at the caterpillars. So this is a common species called the unicorn prominent. Looks kind of like the dead curling edge of the leaf, right? So it's hiding in plain sight. And look at that one on what do they call them? Do they call them for cedars? Scales? What's the term for the twig on the, because they don't call them needles. I think it's called scales. Thank you. See, I can't do this in Zoom. Where is he? Right here. Here's his little head, just like the buds. Ain't that crazy? And they can just plain disappear. Those are two caterpillars just affixed to the bark. I nearly ran into this one. That ain't a twig. That's an inchworm that looks like a twig. So they know these hungry birds are out there, and yeah, they're doing everything they can to not get eaten. This one shows up. This is the morning glory prominent. It is a terrible common name. They don't use morning glories. I don't know where that name came from, but tradition has made it stick. So when you see something interesting, what do? I hope you do the same thing that I do. I poked it. This is probably why I shouldn't go to Australia. So it flies away, and where does it land? Don't that look like the broken edge of a twig? So they're hiding in all stages here. It's not just colors. I'm mimicking textures. I'm mimicking form, all kinds of things. Here is the lunate zale. What a great name, zale. So those icy blue scaling, all that, this was overwintering in my shed. And when I let it go, it landed right next to these lichens, and ooh, that thing just disappears. I mean, if you're a bird flying by at 20 miles, if you're a bird flying by, 15, 20 miles an hour, that's not going to stand out to you. And then, of course, we have moths that are leaf mimics, right? Once again, these are all local species. I'm not like sampling from around the world. These are all from around here. And there's one, so this one up in the upper right here is called the maple spanworm. Look at its larva. It's even got the little bumps of a twig, too. So this thing's a genius at both ends. So now that you are practicing finding things, find the moth. Is it the little thing which little thing on the left? Does everyone think they have it? Or is everyone still lost? So, this is what we're looking for. This is Xylena. Look, doesn't it look like the end of a broken twig? So these guys overwinter as adults. They'll fly in fall, they'll tank up on sap, they'll spend the winter as adult moths, and then they're going to start flying this weekend, I guarantee you. They start waking up, mate, lay eggs, next cycle continues. Can you see it now? I'll point to it on my screen, but see it right here? So once again, you see your little towies and song sparrows and juncos in the brush going. That's what they're skirting up. Gesundheit. You'd be surprised, and I'm surprised at how rare green is in this world. Butterflies aren't really green. There's a small number of moths that are green. You'd think this would be a no-duh color to be, right? Green just must be a hard color to make, because there's actually not many green moths, but they're there. These are all Washington species. The common name for this group is the emeralds. Has anyone ever heard of catoccolas? This group of moths has a literal fan base. There's like a cult following. Like, you think Taylor Swift is popular. Catoccolas have their own fan club, and I have a couple up as specimens if you want to see them, but these commonly are called the underwings, because that's great camouflage, right? But let's say a bird does find you. What does it do? Flash. This was in the hypothesis stage for the longest time. Someone finally tested it, and birds freak out when they see this all of a sudden flash of color, and that gives enough time for the moth. These are incredible flyers, really fast, really agile. That gives them just enough time to get away. And we have catoccolas in all kinds of colors. This will keep the birds guessing, because you imagine if every time you poked one of these and it was red and black, you'd stop getting surprised after a while, right? But next time, it's orange and black. Next time, it's orange and white. And you don't know what's coming next. We have the genus Drastaria, another local. Catoccolas are uncommon in Washington. Very common on the East Coast. But we have sometimes called these Western underwings. They're smaller. Maybe they're not as dramatic, but they're doing the same thing. They're the same family. So largely brown on top, but then, there it goes. And then a flash of color underneath. And we have a number of different species that sport different colors and different patterns doing the same thing. I'm still pondering this Drastaria. I'm not sure what it's trying to startle. This is Drastaria sabulosa. You're not startling anyone with that. Maybe this was the original version everyone built off of this. I don't know. This is the one sporting this strategy you'll most commonly see in your yard. This one is you're mowing your lawn or you're weeding your garden and you see those bright red cocoons in the soil that you dig up. That's this guy. So European, yes. Yellow, that's orange. I'm going to blame that color misidentification on the Europeans. But this one is incredibly common in Western Washington now, but it's doing that same thing where camouflaged on the top, hard to see, and then once it flies has this brilliant orange and black. Now, one of the things they're thinking that this is trying to do, not just startle, but let's say the bird overcomes its startle, and now it's got a colorful target. And then it lands on a tree, folds up his wings, and the birds say, where'd that thing go? Where'd that thing go? So it also gives them a false target that they're now chasing that then they can cover up. So twofold here, startle and then potentially give them a colorful target that's going to disappear. And we see this in not just moths. We see this with a number of insects. Everyone's seen these grasshoppers? Not necessarily these species, but very, very colorful, and then they land and just blend into the landscape. Now, does this remind anyone of a certain bird? This is in the hypothesis stage. I haven't tested this, but I think a certain common yard bird is pulling this off too. How many of you have been walking in local parks and seen that flash of outer white tail feathers when you didn't know it was there? I think the junco might be pulling this off too. I've been surprised by a number of very quiet juncos that, and then I get on them and I see this flash of white. So could the junco be doing this? I don't know. This is a hypothesis right now. Someone go out and test it. I'm not sure how you test it. So if you can't quite fly, but you want to pull off the startle, maybe you got add a little pizzazz to your colors underneath. Anyone know what this moth is? Io? Or did you say I know? You know, I'm wondering what it is. Sorry, it's the Io moth. I'm being a smart aleck. Does anyone know how to spell Io? Io. Okay. I think it's named for Io. So should a jay, or this is a rather large moth, so should a jay or a crow start pecking this, it flashes these eye spots. So maybe it's not the best flyer, so it's going for a scare tactic. And so the Io moth is an eastern U.S. species. Unfortunately, we don't get this one here, but we do have other species here that pull this off. This is the polyphemus moth. This is the one that was on my face in the flyer. And when you peck at this one, flash. And that is actual size, by the way. This was a test to see who's fallen asleep. Come on, go back. So this is the one-eyed sphinx moth, another very large moth. Notice that a lot of the eye spots ones are large. They have to be large to pull off those eye spots. You poke this one on the back. Look at those bright eye spots. We have another species around here called the blinded sphinx. It has eyes. It's not blind. I think it's because this one doesn't have pupils and this one does. I think that's the origin of the common name, but they're going for startle tactic. Anyone know who these are? Everyone knows these. They're the tent caterpillar moths, and that's actually the common name of the moth too. It's the tent caterpillar moth. I know, very, very original we are. Anyone ever seen the adult? Anyone know what these turn into? They're kind of cute. Like teddy bears with antennae and wings. Maybe not going, I'd call them handsome. Maybe not going on a moth calendar anytime soon. Does anyone make a moth calendar? There's one in the back. But so their defense, particularly the caterpillars, is being just so fuzzy. You can imagine this going down a bird's throat, probably not going to feel the best, right? There's also the webbing, although the webbing there's some debate over, does that just shed rain? Is it a protection from parasitoid wasps? But the hairs, we're pretty sure, just irritates the bird's throat as it goes down. There's actually only one species or one type of bird that can really stomach these larvae, that when the caterpillars have a good year, the birds have a good year, and that's the cuckoos. Unfortunately, extirpated from our state now, but you still see the rare ones show up. And then there's, let's just make sure that no one wants to eat us. So aposematism, has anyone ever heard that term? That means I taste bad and I advertise it. So I saw this beetle in eastern Washington. What did I do? I poked it and it started bleeding. So that's its blood. It's called reflex bleeding. And the idea is that when a bird or a frog or whoever takes a chomp on you, you release some of your blood and the bird immediately goes, it gets a mouthful of it before it starts chomping on you. We have moths that do the same thing. So this is the salt marsh tiger moth. More common in eastern U.S. It is in eastern Washington, not really western Washington. But when you poke at it, it curls up its wings, showing its orange underside, and it even does some reflex bleeding up there, you see. Little spot on its thorax. And so we have other tiger moths here. This is the Virginia tiger moth, the yellow woolly bear. It does the same thing where you poke it and it flashes its colorful thorax. We have the cinnabar moth, which we talked about again. Same thing, I touch the cinnabar moth, it starts reflex bleeding. This is to give the bird a taste before it starts really chomping on you, you know what I mean? So monarch and viceroy, classic aposematism example. They're distasteful to birds. So they've converged on the same color pattern just to reinforce the orange and black coloring to birds, don't eat us. That's a tag for monarch tracking. So we put a little sticker on its wings. It flies hundreds of miles. Someone sees that sticker and it says, has an email and a number. So if someone finds 6578, they say, this is where I found it. Like, cool, this is where I tagged it. Do we then know how far it traveled? So we have other animals that do this too. Everyone knows rough-skinned newts, yes? I think enough poison to kill everyone in this class. I think. But same thing, you poke it and it shows its orange underbelly. Say, don't think about it. So if you're not going to, if you are tasty, if you're not aposematic, if you're not going to, but you want to maybe gain some defenses, there's this thing called Batesian mimicry, and that's looking like something that might be unpleasant to eat. These are moths. They are not bumblebees. So these are both Washington moths. I don't know if the snowberry clearwing is up on Whidbey, but it's down in the prairies. I think you might find it out here. But they are moths that fly during the day. What good is it flying around looking like a bee at night, right? Now, if you ever see these and are confused at how to tell the difference, they hover in front of their flowers and drink from them like their sphinx moth relatives, kind of like hummingbirds do. Bumblebees land on the flower. So you can tell if it's the moth or the bumblebee by looking at the feeding behavior. You wonder if birds have picked up on this, because they're losing out on a meal. We're just innately curious. That's a moth. So this is the raspberry crown borer? Thank you, Jane. So this is the raspberry crown borer. So if you grow raspberries, you might know this one, and it might actually be an enemy of yours. They bore into the stems and kill the stem of the raspberry. But they fly in August, about the time when wasp and hornet populations peak. They make an audible buzzing noise. If you catch them, they make curling motions with their abdomen like they're going to sting you. They can't. So you look for the proboscis. They don't have mandibles like the wasps do. And we have a whole family of these called the Society, the clearwing moths, that are just the most exceptional wasp mimics. Ain't that cool? And remember, this is all in defense of birds, because we haven't even talked about their most common predator. What good is any of this coloration when your predator can't even see you? So we haven't even talked about the defenses that moths have come up with that have evolved for bats. My arm could be twisted, though. Anyway, I will just start with, they have a myriad of defenses. But one of the differences between butterflies and moths, many, but not all moths have ears. Butterflies are deaf. Birds don't really make a lot of sound when they're hunting. When they're It depends on the family. Some are on their legs, some are at the base of their wings. So ears have evolved multiple times in different moth families, because if your predator makes sound to detect you, maybe it's a good thing to hear your predator, right? And some can fight back. Some can jam the bat's sonar. Some emit clicks going back, telling them in a certain pattern, the poisonous ones, so the bat goes, ooh, I've eaten that before, not going to happen again. Some just drop from the sky when they hear bats. So that's one of the differences between butterflies and moths. Many, but not all moths have ears. So at this point, you might be saying, okay, you've convinced me. Moths are fascinating, but how does one study moths? I'm happy you asked. So we know the marriage of moths and light, right? It's not so much that moths are attracted to light so much as we feel that they're trapped by it. And the hypothesis behind why this is, we'll say there's many hypotheses, but they're not mutually exclusive. There could be multiple things working together here, but the hypothesis has the most data behind it to support it, is that moths, and a lot of nighttime flying insects, use the moon and stars for navigation. As they're flying throughout the landscape, the moon is relatively fixed. I mean, it does, quote unquote, move as we rotate. It does move across the sky, but not as fast as this moth is flying, right? So they use that as navigation as they're honing in on the female scent. So in other words, they've picked the wrong moon. And they end up landing on it, and it's so bright. What do moths do when it's bright out? They think it's daytime, and they just sit on the sheet. That's the idea. Could be wrong, could be a little bit wrong. Don't know yet. But so I have this big, expensive, fancy moth sheet you could easily flip on your porch light. So I need this in my backyard in Linwood because we have so much light pollution out there. There's so much competition for the moth's attention in Linwood that I need something really bright. These mercury vapor bulbs are essentially what they use for street lights. So I have a street light in my backyard. Oh, I get some stares from the neighbors. But the smarter moth people use this thing called a bucket trap, where they use a UV light, and then it basically has these veins that trip the moths in flight, and they fall into this funnel, into the bucket where it's nice and dark. And if you're a kind person, you put egg cartons in there so the moths can find a nice place to sleep. And then you wake up in the morning, like Christmas morning, and see what came to your light. And you're all rested. This involves staying up all night. But there's a number of different ways. People have de-electrified bug zappers. And once again, you have the egg cartons around there, funnel trap, all kinds of stuff. They make UV light bulbs you can plug in outside. Practice. People use UV plant grow lights. They use reptile lights. You can usually get those for cheap on eBay or anything like that. So just practice, see what you can go for. You in Whidbey Island probably don't need that much light because you're relatively dark compared to suburban Linwood. I don't know where you necessarily live, but you probably have a lot easier time out here. So practice with different things. Join the mothing and moth watching Facebook group. We're worldwide, and you'll get tons of answers. How do I set up a beginner moth light? So at this point, you have your local moth guy in Jay, but I'd like to introduce you to this man called Carl Barentine. Because at this point, you might be wondering, okay, well, what can I find in my backyard? Oh, I'm happy you asked. So if you follow this man on Facebook, and he's in the mothing group, by the way, he posts every week or every day, he is up to 844 species in his backyard. And he doesn't live in some magical tropical area. He lives in suburban Spokane. And you are not in downtown Linwood or something like that. You're out in Whidbey. You probably have a good chance of hundreds of species. One of my close friends lives out in Hoodsport, Olympia. She's been going at this at a moderate pace, and she's over 400 moths in her backyard, 400 species. I have a friend named Bob Scaffey in Merritt, BC. He's up over 700. So this is the diversity in your backyard. So consider what a good day of butterflying is. I think a good day of butterflying, especially in Western Washington, is anything above 20 species. What's a good day of birding? 40 species? I usually think like 50 or 60. I go home like just absolutely satisfied. That's an average night for mothing. And they come to you. You just turn on your light and they come to you. It's great. And I haven't even talked about finding the caterpillars. My friend in Hoodsport, Tana, she is wonderful at raising these things. She'll find the larva, she'll raise them, see what moths they turn into. It's embarrassing how many moths we don't know what plants they eat. How are you supposed to conserve species when you don't know what plants they eat? So she is very, very good at fun. I'm realizing how much hair I had back in the day. Anyway, so if you're curious about diving into the moth world, there's a number of online resources as well. Online resources are much lighter than these heavy books on 2,500 species. So the Pacific Northwest Moths is a gold mine of information put on by Lars Krabo. He is our Pacific Northwest expert, and Meryl Peterson, entomologist at Western. They have just some of those beautiful colored plates, encyclopedic knowledge on what's known about these species, range maps, season flight charts. Not every moth is on here. The major ones are. They just got funding to do the geometrids. Those are the inchworms. The Moth Photographers Group is my go-to resource when I have a moth I need to identify. They have wonderful color plates of living specimens, of dead specimens. Same thing, flight charts, range maps. You can view it by region. Bug Guide is kind of more of a community page. You can post your photos, people will comment on what they might be, and you can contribute to our knowledge of different insects. And this is Bug Guide, so it's everything, not just moths. Every bug is on this page. My favorite, I'm biased. This is a page that I serve as a coordinator for. So I wouldn't consider this a page to go to get your moth identified, although you can. Basically, you go down to submit a sighting. You can take a photo with your cell phone of the moth on your porch, submit the sighting. We want to know where and when. You get your moth identified by me, and we get your data. So this is a citizen science website. So you, as just a backyard naturalist, can contribute. iNaturalist also, it works in the same way, except for iNaturalist is everything. This is butterflies and moths. Okay, so back to them being bird food, right? So this is going back to the birds that need insects are on decline. What do we do about it? So this is the original presentation that Doug Tallamy gave about keystone plants, because we only have so much space in our yards, right? We don't have acres and acres we can let grow wild. So what choices do we make in our backyard? So Tallamy's group has found that just 5% of our native plants can support 75% of our caterpillars, 75% of our species. So a fraction, only takes a tiny portion, can provide for the majority. 14% support 90% or more. And then a third of our native bees require particular plants to reproduce, but this isn't about bees. So you go to his Keystone Plant page, you look up your region, you see here he categorizes us as marine West Coast forest. I'd say that matches. Now, we know that the Western US does not equal Eastern US, right? Just in the same way as Washington, Western Washington does not equal Eastern Washington. So, for example, he looked at northern red oak in its native range in Pennsylvania, where he lives, and then he'll look at the insects that use it in Portland, Oregon, where it's been planted as an ornamental. Much fewer areas eaten in its non-native range because the local insects just aren't adapted to it. They don't recognize it as food, or they just plain can't eat it. So keystone plants really only play keystone roles in their native ranges. Remember that. So caterpillar biomass on native plants versus alien plants, you see a lot of variance in there. But even generalist biomass, so generalist we use as a term for species that can do okay on a wide variety of plants. They do even far better on native species than alien species of plants. And so I mention this because, no fault to Doug. Doug's from the East Coast. West Coast isn't his area. I would make the same mistakes if I tried to do a planting guide for the East Coast, right? So he has, for example, on our list, Plains coreopsis as a good plant, as you can see, for the specialist bees. But then you look at the range map of coreopsis, and that's not on Whidbey Island, not anywhere close. So this would be an example of a species planted outside its native range, probably wouldn't serve a keystone plant role here. So this is more kind of one of those like little warning things before you dive too much into this, is don't take it for gold, kind of look at the range maps a bit. But he'll have some great lists of top keystone plant genera, so genuses of plants in marine West Coast forest. Once again, Oregon white oak. Do we have a lot of white oak up here? Not really. Might not be a keystone plant here, but if you were to go down to Vancouver, Washington, oh, it absolutely would, because it's more native down there. It'll have the top keystone plant genera for butterfly and moth caterpillars, and there's a lot of these that match here. So things like prunus are cherries. If someone were to ask, what's the one tree, I only have space for one tree, what should I put? Bitter cherry. Prunus emarginata. But if you have a wet area, willows, provided they're not near a water line. Those roots will crush water pipes. So when you choose your plants, when you go through this list, think multi-use. What plants might provide nectar for pollinators that then might turn into edible seeds or berries for birds in the summer, that also might provide food for caterpillars? And hey, if they can serve as a nesting ground, if they can serve as a nesting platform, plant, if birds nest in them, added bonus. So think multi-use when you're choosing your plants, especially if you have a limited yard. So kind of more on a just wrapping up note, we can't go back to how things were. We like to think of like 250 years ago was the magical time, but remember, change is the only constant in nature. It's always been changing. This is just a current chapter of life on our planet. So how do we want nature, our habitat, to look? We do have influence. A lot of people wait. A lot of people want the perfect plan. Stop waiting. It doesn't have to be perfect. Nothing's perfect out there. You know enough to get started. So especially in Western Washington, start experimenting and watching. We need more data. So the more you plant, the more observations you put on iNaturalist or Pomona or Bug Guide, the more this is going to help others do the same. So on that note, welcome to the dark side. Any questions? I see there's some questions on the chat. Patty, did you want to field those or? Okay, any immediate burning questions from the audience? Way in the back. Jay, have you kept a list of the number of moths you've seen? 360. 360 in your backyard only in Whidbey? Couple of crambids and grasslands, otherwise majority in his backyard. Just his house, 360. And how often are you putting out lights? 3 years. How often per day? Because Carl's doing it every single day. Oh, wow. So, mm-hmm. So 360 in his backyard here. I mean, who in mine? I don't keep track. I know. I mean, I don't even know what my bird list is at. Kind of shameful. She was asking what my moth list is at, and I don't keep track of those numbers. If I sat down and actually tally them all, I could find it, but at the end of the day, I just don't care. Who has 300? Excuse me, tripping over my tongue here. Who has 360 species of birds in their backyard? Moths win. Any other questions, Sarah? I'll repeat your question.
How did you get into moths? Did you get a degree, or how did you sort of study? And
did I get a degree in moths? Oh, if only there were such a thing. So I'm going to give you the cliche answer of butterflies chose me, I didn't choose them. So short story, teenager, into photography, always into wildlife, went to the zoo, photographed everything, did a little bit of background research on everything I photographed. Nothing grabbed me like butterflies did. So I did this for the gorillas. I did this for the monitor lizards. I did this for the elephants. And yeah, they're cool, but just butterflies, like, whoa. That's pretty fascinating. I just dove in and I just kept digging deeper and deeper. And when you're out chasing butterflies, you find day flying moths. Moths that fly during the day, and you're pouring through the field guide and you're like, I think I found a new species of butterfly. Nope, well-known day flying moth. And you go, moths fly during the day? This changes my entire world. And then you get into the night flying ones, and you just, once again, moths equal the meaning of life. So that's how I got into moths via butterflies via photography. No conscious choice was made. I just follow where my interest went. That was it. Any other questions?
Just say the question.
Just rock, paper, scissors. The grubs, I'll repeat the question. So what about the grubs in the water? The dippers. Yep. That's one of the things they're eating. So not only they're going for the caddisflies, the black fly larvae, all that kind of stuff, the stonefly larvae. Yes, they're also going for these moth larvae. Oh, any bugs in there, they're going for. Can you tell the difference between butterflies, or I guess the bigger question is, how do you tell the difference between butterflies and moths? So there's a lot of rules that are like the I before E except after C rules. They work for a lot of them, but there's so many exceptions it shouldn't be a rule. So butterflies fly during the day, moths at night. Plenty of moths that fly during the day. No butterflies that fly at night up here. We're not talking about the tropics. All rules break down in the tropics. Moths are fuzzy. Butterflies aren't. You go up to Mount Rainier, you see some fuzzy butterflies. You go to Alaska, you see some fuzzy butterflies. It just, when you're in colder environments, fuzz just helps insulate. The way they hold their wings when they rest, nope, that doesn't really help. There's general rules, but there's a lot of exceptions. The way to tell the difference, look at their antenna. I wish I should have put in a photo for this, but butterflies have skinny antenna with clubs on the end. Moths either have skinny antenna, no clubs, or very feathery antenna. Now that does require the insect to stop, which is why I use a butterfly net, but if you got a camera, you can't really get it to stop. But once again, that breaks down in the tropics. Oh, frogs, yep. Mm-hmm.
Do they consume the moths as well?
Do frogs consume moths? Yes. I would say more opportunistically. So if the moth is sitting in front of them, frogs, they'll go for it. If you want to see, this is a video I just saw recently. There's a group of moths called the slug caterpillars. Anyone ever heard of them? Really prominent on the East Coast. We have one species here, and it doesn't really have the stinging hairs, but the caterpillars have urticating hairs that sting like the dickens. And there's a good video on YouTube. You go, frog eats stinging caterpillar. And just a good example of this giant pet frog goes for one of these caterpillars and immediately spits it out, and you can just see this thing in pain, just. And the caterpillar just slowly waddling away, like, "I'll teach you next time, buddy."
We don't have cuckoos here. What eats the tent caterpillars?
So because we don't have cuckoos here, what eats the tent caterpillars? Not really a lot of birds, but a lot of bugs. The next time you look at these caterpillars, look closely, and you'll see a lot of white dots on them. Those are tachinid fly eggs. So these tachinid flies lay eggs on them. The larvae burrow into the caterpillar and eat them alive. Brutally beautiful. So I'll field a couple more questions from the audience, and then Patty's going to field some from Zoom. Sarah, one more question?
I think I've heard that with those tachinid flies eating the caterpillars, that's why they'll wipe out one area one year, but they won't the next year because.
So it's not just.
It helps to balance their population.
It's not just the ichneumoniid wasps and the tachinid flies that break down the population. As they get more dense, viruses spread a lot faster as well, and that also helps to knock them down. So with these tent caterpillars, it's cyclical, where they'll be at such low densities, the viruses and predators can't find them until they build up to a certain level, and then it's just a feast, knocks them back down. Was there one more question? Keystone plants.
Yeah. Is there a site that's said, when you go on the website, it's Keystone Plants?
So if you Google Douglas Tallamine Keystone Plants, you'll find the site. On Zoom, I'll usually post it, so I should have brought it out for this, but Douglas Tallamine. If you Google Keystone Plants, you'll find it. If not, take one of my cards and I'll just send you the website.
Also on our website, we have some materials on the native plants that are keystone for us.
We had Douglas Tallamine via Zoom about 3 years ago or so, and so we got some of the. Yeah.
So Patty, any burning questions from Zoom? I was asking Patty to field the questions from Zoom.
There was a question from Sago, and could you speak more to prey on caterpillars
during winter? So once again, you see the creepers climbing up the tree. You see the nuthatches climbing down the tree in winter. They're looking for all those sleeping bugs. And once again, not just moths and caterpillars, but any flies, any aphids, like they're still around in winter. They're just hiding the best they can. You see your sparrows kicking up the leaves. They're looking for the overwintering larvae in the leaves. So all these things are still there. It's not like they disappear. They're just not as active and noticeable to us, but that's what these little songbirds are going for. And there's plenty of adult moths that spend the winter as adult moths. They're completing their cycle again, basically. And then there's plenty of caterpillars. It depends on what species you are. Generally, different species have a very strict overwintering stage. This species the herald overwinters as an adult, no exceptions. If you're a European yellow underwing, you overwinter as a half-grown larva, no exceptions. Hummingbirds and caterpillars?
It's a follow-up to the last question.
Not that I know of. So I know that our annas eat more insects than other hummingbirds do, and that's one of the reasons why they can stay farther north in winter. But I'm not sure they eat caterpillars. I think they eat more flying insects. They might go for a micro moth, but I just know of no references of it.
Are the caterpillar chimps the ones that turn into gypsy moths, and do birds eat gypsy moths?
Which caterpillars turn into gypsy moths?
Well, she's asking about the caterpillar tents, the ones.
Oh, the tents. No, so they're not in the same family. Are they in the same family, or is that the Limantridae? You can tell it's winter and I haven't been looking at my moths that much lately. So it's been birds all winter. The birds keep me sane in the winter. I need to go re-look at. So no, so the gypsy moth is not related to the tent caterpillar. Do birds eat them? That's a great question because we don't have gypsy moths in Washington. I actually worked for the Washington Department of Agriculture, hanging up those gypsy moth traps. And they have found gypsy moths introduced every single year in Washington, and every year they've eradicated them. So there's a governmental organization that actually deserves a standing ovation, excuse me. Yeah, you can ask anyone from the East Coast, you do not want those moths here. Any other questions from Zoom? So if you have, so it's 8:30, was that when it was scheduled to be over? Hot damn, I got it. So if you have individual questions, I will hang out. I will answer individual questions if you need my card for various reasons. I've got plenty of them. I'd be happy to talk to you about a class I'm leading in the Sierras in early July. So come camp at 5,600 feet and go for a whole week. We just search for butterflies and moths all week in the Sierras, and all your foods are cooked and all that kind of stuff. So come talk to me about that. Not by me, by competent people.